Logic requires strict boundaries. When evaluating an argument, it is a severe error to assume that what is true of a macroscopic whole is automatically true of its individual parts. This is known as the fallacy of division. To understand exactly why this reasoning fails, we apply the analytical framework outlined by T. Edward Dahmer in Attacking Faulty Reasoning. This fallacy is the exact mathematical inverse of the fallacy of composition, which incorrectly assumes that individual parts dictate the properties of the whole. The fallacy of division is a structural failure. By relying on an unstated assumption, it explicitly violates the acceptability criterion of a well-formed argument. That hidden, unacceptable premise is a flawed equation, the strict, indefensible assumption that systems and their subsets possess identical traits. Physical and logical reality proves otherwise. Wholes frequently represent emergent states. The way components relate and interact creates a final structure that is completely different from the initial raw materials. Relying on this hidden axiom fractures the structural integrity of everyday reasoning. It guarantees false conclusions. This logical failure translates directly into data analysis as a statistical trap. The error occurs when you take a broad, class-wide statistical generalization and infer that it perfectly describes one randomly selected member of that class. Averages describe groups, not individuals. Natural variation guarantees that an overall population metric cannot map flawlessly onto every outlier. Professionals routinely fall into this trap. They assign macro-level demographic profiles to individual clients or project industry-wide market trends onto single startups. Whether applied to physical structures or statistical models, the illusion of inheritance destroys analytical accuracy. To expose this hidden flaw in real time, we use a method called guided derivation, breaking everyday arguments down into explicit premises. Consider a textbook case study. A high school senior decides to reject the University of Virginia. We observe the imposing architecture and understand the scale of the institution. The student argues based on two explicit premises. First, they prefer small, intimate classes. Second, they know this university is a large school. We map this logic. The parent system, the university, is designated as large. The subsets inside that system are the individual classes. The argument collapses on the implicit premise. The student falsely assumes the massive scale of the parent system mandates a massive scale for every subsystem. Institutional scale does not dictate component scale. A university with tens of thousands of students routinely hosts highly specialized internet seminars. Conflating the macro size of an institution with the micro size of an individual experience is a textbook acceptability violation. This logic engine remains broken even when we shift from institutional data to subjective aesthetic judgments. Observe this subject. The unified whole of the face is widely considered cohesive and handsome. The arguer makes a deductive leap, assuming that because the face is handsome, a specific isolated part, like the nose or the mouth, must automatically be handsome on its own. We map the conceptual error. The validation applies to the entire arrangement of features working in sequence. When the arguer separates a single feature from the whole, the structural logic collapses. Aesthetic wholes are highly dependent arrangements. They rely on proportion and contrast, not a direct reflection of individual, perfect parts. Dissecting a holistic property destroys the very property being evaluated. We can push this fallacy to its absolute limit by applying it to abstract biological properties. We start with a macroscopic, explicit premise. Normal human beings are conscious entities. This microscopic imaging shows individual, disconnected human cells. The fallacious deduction assumes that because the parent organism is conscious, these individual cellular components must also be conscious. This deduction is categorically flawed. Consciousness is the ultimate emergent property, generated by billions of neurons interacting in a complex network. The macro-scale human form generates this property. It is a hard boundary of biological emergence. Attempting to transfer this abstract property down to the micro level fails completely. A single cell cannot carry the traits of the network. Emergent macrostates simply do not exist at the component level. Any argument that assumes otherwise is logically void. Identifying the fallacy is only the first step. You must also know how to dismantle it in an active debate. A successful logical counterattack requires the principle of intellectual charity. You begin by conceding ground. Acknowledge to your opponent that in very specific instances, characteristics actually do transfer from the whole to the part. Offer a concrete example. If a bowl of punch is perfectly mixed and sour, you can accurately deduce that a single cup of that punch will also be sour. The uniform mixture guarantees it. Yielding this minor reasonable ground disarms the opponent. It proves you are tracking their logic, which sets the trap for the definitive counterstrike. You then deploy the ultimate rhetorical weapon, the absurd counterexample. The mechanics are simple. You temporarily accept their flawed logic engine, apply it to a new subject, and drive it straight into a wall of undeniable reality. This map of the United States illustrates the textbook response. We establish the factual premise that the United States, as a whole, is incredibly geographically diverse. We then apply the opponent's fallacy of division to this geographic reality. Their logic dictates that a singularly topographically flat state like Kansas must therefore be geographically diverse, simply because it is part of a diverse country. Generating this stark factual absurdity forces the opponent to recognize the mathematical crash. It proves their implicit connecting premise is unacceptable. By mastering the mechanics of the fallacy of division and weaponizing the absurd counterexample, you sharpen your ability to dismantle broken logic and extract truth from noise.